This is my home. I live on the south side of Milwaukee, as I have my entire life. There have been a few changes here and there, but most of it has stayed the same since it was built back in 1927. And there are even a few quirks as a result of its age. These quirks speak a rich history, a result of a bygone era where many small things were different. In fact, there is evidence all around my neighborhood of this history. Buildings built in the early 1900s are still around, the same, but different. Being in Milwaukee, a lot of our history is rooted in brewing and beer. Of course, that shaped the environment back then, as it still does today. There are a couple buildings across from Ohio Park that were built in 1926 and 1927 that were once bars and are now other types of businesses, being a salon and a daycare. The beer industry changes, and so do the people. Though in general, when one thinks of Milwaukee, you usually think of a few prominent names: Pabst, Schlitz, Miller, or Blatz. And of course, that's for good reason. Those companies were extremely influential, not only in the culture surrounding beer and brewing, but also on Milwaukee's culture itself. However, maybe due to their booming success, some other, smaller breweries got left in the dust. A remnant of the past, more or less forgotten. This was something that hit close to home, pun intended, when I discovered Independent Milwaukee Brewery. I sent an email over to the American Geographical Society Library here at UW Milwaukee for some help in finding some maps of my neighborhood from back in the day, ideally 100+-ish years, so that I could get some information about my favorite place, my house. They were a huge help. They sent me maps from 1901, 1916, and 1926. Using their wonderful website, I was able to reference some other maps from 1927, 1936, and 1962. I may be a little biased being a Milwaukee native myself, but it is pretty wonderful seeing the change over time in these maps. So keeping breweries in mind, when I went to explore the map from 1901, it caught my attention when I saw a brewery on the south side named Milwaukee Brew Co. I was surprised to have stumbled upon it, not only because it's tiny and I wasn't exactly looking for it. I was just scanning my general area, neighborhood, to see if there was anything that caught my attention, and inevitably there was. I had no idea this was there, but I guess I'll call it a happy accident. Now, I recognize the name Milwaukee Brew Co. as there is a Milwaukee Brewing Company today, but from some light research, they seem to be completely unrelated, and I couldn't really find much about the original in question outside of what I'll go into today. Taking another look at the map, there is conveniently a section in the directory specifically for breweries. Turns out, of the 8 breweries listed on this map, Milwaukee Brew Co. is the only one on the south side. Just up the street from my house, too. But what happened to it? Surely being the only brewery on the south side would have given it some influence. So I decided to check the 1916 map in the same spot. And of course, there is something there. Just slightly south and with a different name. And it's also bigger. Ind Mill Brewery. Never in my life have I heard of that. A quick hop, skip, and search away, I stumble upon the name Independent Milwaukee Brewery. This is where things really started to get interesting. Likely back in the later half of the 1890s, Henry Newman Bills became an agent for Milwaukee Brew Co. But years later, in 1901, he would, along with 4 partners, buy the brewery and rename it Independent Milwaukee Brewery. Bills would eventually buy out his partners, becoming president of the company and bringing in his sons, Henry and Harry Bills, and his son-in-law, Fred Elsner, on board. Independent would stick around for years, even through Prohibition, by making near beer, malt syrup, and soda under the name Bills. They were doing pretty well for themselves, and they were a staple of Milwaukee for a long time, especially after surviving Prohibition. Through all these years of operation, there was one thing that was very consistent that caught my eye: a beer that they made, from the start in 1901. Braumeister. Braumeister was Independent's most popular beer and made its name being a traditional German lager. Light, crisp, and refreshing as German lagers tend to be, it fit in perfectly yet stood out within the Milwaukee beer landscape. Braumeister would seemingly continue to be produced all the way up until the brewery's closing in 1964. Interestingly enough, I actually recognized the Braumeister label. I mean, it is pretty unique and hard to miss, and my dad is a beer fanatic. In fact, the signs surrounding me are from my dad's collection. In his collection, he's got a huge assortment of old beer cans, some dating back from the 40s. So naturally, that is where I checked first. And of course, yeah, that was exactly the case. My dad happened to have 3 cans of Braumeister in his collection. I was especially intrigued by this one, which is in remarkable condition for being a beer that should have stopped production in '64. But upon closer inspection, it's not actually made by an independent brewery. Peter Hand, Chicago, Illinois. I had no idea what I was looking at. I thought Braumeister was an independent brewery beer only. I asked my dad, and he let me know that it was actually a surviving piece of independent brewery. The Braumeister recipe and name was bought and passed along after Independent's closing. This was so exciting for me to hear because there's more to the story than I previously thought. From my dad's knowledge, it had been around up until 80s, 90s. He didn't really drink it, so he wasn't exactly sure. But I figured the best way to find out was to research the trademark. That's something that by law has to have records, right? So I did end up finding that trademark, and I was able to confirm it is indeed for Braumeister. It even goes into detail describing the logo in its design aspects. Man wearing folk or historical costumes, eating or drinking, clusters and sheaves of other grains, including stalks of grains, bottle label, circular or elliptical seals. I could finally find out what exactly happened to Braumeister and where the line ended. First use date, 1914. Filing date, 1948. Registration date, 1950. Status date, and when it was most recently renewed, 2019. Now this really struck me. Why in the world would a company go through the trouble of renewing the trademark if it's not being produced? Is that not just a complete waste of money? Luckily, there is a trademark owner history, and I come to find it's not owned by Peter Hand. The chain of ownership went as such. Independent, Peter Hand, Fred Huber, Berghoff Huber, Joseph Huber, Mountain Crest, and finally, where it stays now, Rhinelander Brewing Company. So, of course, I found their website, and I couldn't find anything in the section labeled Our Beers, and I got worried. To me, having that section be blank screamed that they were no longer in operation. We all know about the effects of the pandemic in 2020 and how it unfortunately shut down a lot of small businesses. So with that in mind, it wouldn't be too unlikely that a small brewery had to close up shop due to the pandemic not too long after they renewed the precious Braumeister trademark. But luckily they do have a number, so I gave it a call and they sell it. That was the wonderful news I was looking for. Braumeister is still around. I was honestly stunned. I started planning the 4-hour drive up to Rhinelander, Wisconsin just to get my hands on this beer. But thankfully, whoever was speaking on the phone with me saved me a big trip. Despite Rhinelander being the holder of the Braumeister trademark, they don't actually make it up in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. They have it contracted to a brewery in Monroe, Wisconsin, Minhas Brewery. This was about half the drive, so that made it a lot easier to get to. So after calling to confirm that they do indeed sell Braumeister, I made my way there, armed with nothing but my wallet. I was getting that Braumeister no matter what. The anxiety on that 2-hour drive was intense, and it got more intense with every single step that I took, literally and figuratively. I drive by the main building, and I see the Minhas logo. I walk to a door. It has the Minhas sign over it. I go in, And initially I'm nervous that I'm in the wrong place, but my nerves were calmed once I saw the Rhinelander sign in the bar. I moved further into the building. They had old cans and boxes on display, and one of them was Braumeister. It felt even more real now. I stepped into their gift shop area, and I finally laid eyes on it. Braumeister. Surprisingly cheap too, at $12.99 for a case of 30. This was quite nice to see, not only because it's easier on my wallet, but it stays true to its roots as a nice, cheap, light beer for the working man to buy and drink after a hard day. I go to the checkout, and of course, I'm at peak excitement. I'm blabbering on about all the steps that it took to get to where I am now and why I did everything. The extremely kind employee checking me out, Lori, was just as excited as I was. She started making calls all around the brewery, telling everybody I drove all the way from Milwaukee and I need some questions answered. Now, I honestly didn't come prepared with any questions. I just figured I'd come and get the beer and that was it. But I could not pass up this opportunity to ask people who work with Braumeister about Braumeister. So I talked to a gentleman working in the brewery named Jeff, and I asked him how similar Braumeister is to its old counterpart. He told me that the only change he could think of was likely in the malt to corn syrup change, as that's a lot more common practice now, whereas like when Braumeister was first made in 1901, that it wasn't around. This can actually be backed up in a picture from the drink that made Wisconsin famous. And in the background, you can see an advertisement for Braumeister malt syrup at this store. The fine people at the brewery were nice enough to give me additional info in the form of a book that they sell in their gift shop, Brewing Up a Damn Good Story. It's got a lot of interesting information that I was able to use to cross-reference. It's got history of their brewery, and they even have some stuff on Braumeister. They also gave me the number for the brewmaster, Gabe Hopkins. I asked him a few questions and he answered them briefly. As brewmaster, how would you describe Braumeister as a beer?
It's a traditional German lager.
Do you know what changes, if any, have been made to the recipe of Braumeister since you guys acquired it?
None.
Is there anything that like sets it apart from any other light beers or German lagers in the same class?
It's just a traditional German lager. 60% corn, 40% two-row, German noble hops on it.
What do you think Braumeister provides beer drinkers today?
Just a light, easy, sessionable beer. It's not too malty, not too hoppy, not too high in alcohol.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
All right, then.
All right. You have a great one. Bye. I tried it for myself, of course, and it's pretty nice. Light, smooth, easy to drink. Honestly, about what you would expect from a light beer. So after all of this, I gave my grandpa a call. I told him all about my project, and I'm not gonna lie, I did have a little bit of an agenda going into this call. I was hoping that he was familiar with independent and specifically with Braumeister. And thank the Lord, he was. In fact, he used to get a fish fry from the bar that is the last standing remnant of the brewery buildings. As to the roots of the use of this exact building when it was built in 1927, I'm not exactly sure, but it was built on independent Milwaukee brewery territory. But what I do know is that up until about 6 years ago, it was a bar, and it is now a Mexican restaurant. After getting all the goods, I had to have him over for a taste test. I asked him if he remembers the taste, and he said no. However, once he took that first sip,
kind of brings back the flavor.
yeah, so it really came full circle. Braumeister lives, and Minhas revived it. My dad had come home from work, and he came down to the basement bar where we were, and he joined us for a beer. We all just sat and chatted over a Braumeister. In this moment, I had a wonderful thought. Despite the time passes and all the changes that the process the breweries and labels have all undergone, Braumeister still ended up serving the same purpose it once did: being a social anchor. It brought 3 generations of men together, and even after I got the information I needed, we just sat and talked over a refreshing light lager in Braumeister, as some once did back when it was made by independent Milwaukee brewery. I even got to learn a little bit more about my dad and how he ended up getting his collection.
When we went on vacation anywhere, you'd hunt for beer cans?
Remember on the train in Canada?
That's what I'm telling them.
So Molson, I asked the waiter was cleaning the tables. It was on the train car in the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, can I have those empty cans? And go ahead,
I remember when the kids were small, we were just out of sight of Banff, and there was a railroad yard, and there was some garbage cans or whatever, and we stopped there just to rest a minute. You guys would scrunch in the garbage cans and look for can.
I don't know. It all of a sudden became a thing in the mid '70s.
Like
Around
beer cans.
1975, you collect different things. All of a sudden, that became the rage. And in our basement, we had that a steel beam. And it was an I-beam. So, like up here in the basement, there would be one giant shelf. So we had to put the beer cans, line up your beer cans along that. And it was all the boys in the neighborhood would do that too. Like Steve Dasher, Ron Fiola, all our buddies, they would do. So you go in their basement. And it was kind of a status thing of, you have your beer cans lined up along the I-beam, like you have a bigger collection. And then when you ran out of room, then you made shelves, and, that was really a big thing. And you trade with people, because you have, I have doubles of Braumeister. I have a double of Pabst, and you trade different ones. Like you did with Yu-Gi-Oh cards and all that, We trade beer cans.
It truly felt surreal in this moment to just relish in it all. Enjoying good company and enjoying good beer.